You are listening to the Vichaar Manthan podcast.
Namaste, everyone. That is so feeble. I know it's Sunday afternoon, but I need to hear a little bit better than that. So namaste, everyone.
Namaste.
Thank you very much. The divinity within me salutes the divinity within you. So thank you for joining me here and the Vichaar Manthan team on this Sunday afternoon for what I hope will be a riveting conversation with Sri Rajiv Ji. For those that don't know, the VM podcast is a project looking to explore modern day platforms and issues through a dharmic lens, and we'll hopefully go into the details of what dharma even means. I'm sure many of us are on that quest already. And so through in-depth interviews with some of the best thinkers of our time, we're trying to explore how we can better understand dharma, better understand our lives, and see if we can uncover the ancient and classical ideals of sustainability and flourishing. So we are on all streaming platforms, as Nitiji mentioned at the start, so Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and of course Audible. So namaste once again, everyone. My name is Sumit Sharma. This is another episode of the Vichaar Manthan podcast, live in London with Sri Rajiv Ji Malhotra. Rajiv Ji is initially trained as a physicist. He then went on to study computer science and specialized in AI in the 70s. And after a successful corporate career in the US, he went on to become an entrepreneur and founded several IT companies, which were in over 20 countries. Since the early 90s, Rajiv Ji has been the founder of a non-profit organization called the Infinity Foundation in Princeton, where he has been busy researching civilizations, their engagement with technology, and that from a historical lens, from a social science lens, and also from a mind science lens. So those perspectives, I think, we'll uncover as to why they're important in today's podcast episode. He's also the author of several best-selling books. Hands up who has a copy of one of Rajiv Ji's books. I know Nitiji is quite a good number on this side, less on this side. So this side, do go to the book stand at the end. I think they are on at a discounted rate, especially for today, as part of Rajiv Ji's tour here in the UK, where he spent the last couple of days traveling and giving talks and seminars. But today, hopefully, will be slightly different. It's a live podcast episode. And so then by a show of hands, who's signed up and subscribed to the VM podcast before? Who's listened to a previous episode? Less than number of books. I think we're on par here today. Rajiv Ji is also the chairman of the Board of Governors at the Center for Indic Studies at the University of Massachusetts. He's a visiting professor at the Jawaharlal Nehru University and sits on the advisory board of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies in Shimla. So a lot of accolades. Rajiv Ji has been tirelessly working for several decades now in this Indic space. I am, for one, honoured and privileged to be here, to be asking him questions, and so encourage all of you to submit your questions online. And if we get to them, that'll be great. If not, I'm sure there'll be an opportunity in the future. So Rajiv Ji, welcome to the Vichaar Manthan podcast.
Thank you for having me here. I've enjoyed my last 5 days of Britain. Excellent weather. We had some wildfires in Canada blowing smoke in into New Jersey. So I've left that and come here. Much better weather.
You brought the sunshine here for us today.
Yes.
So I know there's thunderstorms predicted. So as soon as you leave,
oh my God,
we'll be back to the thunderstorms in particular. So Rajiv Ji, you've written a bunch of different books, all deep in Indic thought. Being Different, which I have a copy of and have been studying for the past several weeks, talks a lot about this concept of Western universalism. So for our audience here today, can you help us understand what that is and why it's a problem?
So the West believes that its experiences in history are the experiences that every society must go through, either has gone through or will go through. The West believes, actually starting with Hegel, that it's at the front of history, others are following behind. So Hegel famously said that your situation today, talking to the rest of the world, the way you are is the way we were, and the way we are is the way you will be. So it's sort of like we are the parents, you are the children, and you have to be like us. So this view of history and all the experiences the West had, philosophically, sociologically, all the good things, bad things, are a template that others should follow. So this view, this worldview is what is Western universalism, universalizing the Western experience, not giving respect to the fact that your experience may be different, and maybe that's good for you, and not what I'm saying is good for you. And it could even be that your experience is more universal. Perhaps mine is more peculiar to my circumstances, and I did not discover universal facts and universal truths and universal values to the extent you did. So the reason now there is a Chinese universalism, there is a Eskimo universalism, there is a Arab universalism. People tend to think that what we have discovered, what we know must be universally true. But what makes Western universalism particularly powerful is colonial spreading and expanding that universalism to all parts of the world. I mean, if China had conquered the world, then Chinese universalism would be the one we would be talking about.
Sure, and if Hitler had managed to be successful in his war, we would maybe have a German.
We'll be speaking in German, and perhaps German ideas and values would be our ideas. It would be Hitler universalism. So the power of the West to spread its ideology, its languages, all of that, makes Western universalism a special target that we ought to be concerned about. So colonization is basically when we accept Western universalism as our template, which we have done.
And this acceptance is probably quite subtle.
Very subtle.
Weaved into the fabric of life, and we probably are not aware of it
as
such. What are some of those tenets? How would one today identify what a universalism is for them?
So, for example, take language. We've accepted language uncritically. We've accepted language. So our terms have been mapped onto English terms. So we aren't even questioning. For instance, you take a term like Shakti. Now, Shakti has been translated as energy. So we say this light is Shakti, and fine. But Shakti, in the Sanskrit sense, is also intelligent, is also conscious, is also a person. So it's not dead matter. There's a lot more happening in Shakti than in energy. So by translating these things, translating Atman as soul is a problem, because soul does not exist in animals, does not exist, as per the Christian view, does not exist in plants, whereas Atman, even by real microscopic entity, even the COVID virus has Atma. So it's not about being good or bad, it's just the way life is. So you can go on.
Good and bad, I was watching one of your talks, I think you gave in Chicago. This good and bad is a Western way of thinking, a very binary, linear approach?
So in the Western universalism, there is a duality between the world of good, which is God, and the devil and so on. We don't have a devil concept. So we have ignorance. There is knowledge and there is ignorance. There is right actions and wrong actions, karma, which has its consequences. But it's not the same thing as evil, which is personified by the devil. We don't have that concept.
Sure. And what are some of the real world impacts of these things here today? So me in my life, I live and breathe in the UK. What impact has this universalism had upon me, say?
So one of the most important things I can think of when you were introducing Vichaar Manthan, I was reflecting on the fact that this idea of open dialogue and open, free-spirited inquiry is very deeply rooted in our metaphysics, but absent in the Judeo-Christian and Abrahamic world for a reason. The same kind of openness hasn't happened in that part of the world, in that tradition, for a reason, and the reason is that what I call history-centrism. Okay. History-centrism means the truth is has been revealed once in history in a very special event. It could be Moses that did it for the Jews. It could be the whole Jesus experience for the Christians. It could be the Muhammad experience, what he heard from Allah for the Muslims. This truth happened just once. It will never happen again. And therefore, the study of that history is the only way you could find that truth. Okay. If somebody tells you that this water has certain properties, and you are required to accept that because it was historically said, sure, and it has been passed down through history, and you have no way to verify it for yourself, that would be history-centrism. Now, the way science works is not that. The way science works is you can verify the claims right now. So Newton made certain claims, made some Newtonian laws, but even if you say that Newton never existed, you deny the historicity of Newton, or you say Newton was a bad guy, or he was not an Englishman, he was a Chinese or something. It doesn't matter as far as the laws are concerned, because you can verify them for yourself. Okay. So our tradition does not believe that the final truth is something that is limited to historical access. It can be accessed now by each one of us. And that is the state we call the Rishi state available to every human being. And so our truth was not revealed by God to a certain person on a mountain once upon a time that will never be repeated again. The Rishis achieved it in higher states of meditation. None of them said that I'm the final Rishi. None of them said that you can't have this experience. Every one of them said, what I'm telling you is my experience and you can have the same. So Buddha in fact never said, nor did in the Jainism, nor in the Hindu rishis, no one in our dharma tradition said that I'm the first or I'm the last. Sure. And none of them said that God spoke to me and I'm the privileged one, the only voice, and you better memorize and keep track, be obsessed with this history I'm going to tell you, because if you lose track of this history, you'll be lost forever. You have no other access to truth. So this is a huge, it means that if you lose this history, you are just doomed. And so, and we, the church or wherever the particular religion happens to be, are the only keepers of this history. And so to get to know the truth, you have to have history. To have history, you got to come to us. Right. So that's where dogma comes in. So when that happens, there is no such thing as open dialogue. So you cannot have Vichaar Manthan. You cannot have Vichaar Manthan.
Well, we're here in Britain now, so maybe we can change some of that. So I think parts of what you're saying is there is an allowance for inquiry. And the truth isn't necessarily defined or needs to be concluded here today.
Right.
It's for each of our experience to go on with throughout life.
Right. And so there has never been any Hindu tradition which says that blasphemy or if you disagree, you'll be stoned to death. That tradition hasn't existed. We'll argue with you. We'll say you're wrong, and we'll say that it'll get you in trouble. But I have no authority that God gave me. God did not create a franchise saying that you go around and kick ass and tell people to stand in line, otherwise you're going to do all kind of things to them. So that dogmatic behavior is absent for a reason. It's because the metaphysics of the Vedas is based on the assumption, on the premise, the fundamental premise, that the divine is manifested as each of us. Okay. The divine, and that is what, when you started with Namaste, that's what it means. Now, you cannot convince a knowledgeable Christian. An ignorant Christian will say, yeah, we are the same. But a knowledgeable Christian, if you were to ask him, can you have the Jesus experience? He'll say no. Okay. But you can ask any Hindu, can you have the Rishi experience? He'll say yes, and you are supposed to. Sure. That's what your goal is.
Okay. Now that sounds utopic almost. But what is the real world impact to a layman on the street, someone who does their job, comes home, feeds the family? How is universalism, this Western universalism that you speak of, how is that a problem for a person of today?
Well, on a practical level, you're colonized. Okay. And so you're always at a disadvantage compared to the colonizer. So if it were Chinese universalism one day, obviously they have an advantage because they are the experts. They decide who's right and who's wrong. They adjudicate what is truth. Okay. So the Western world has that advantage because they've come up with all the standards of what is human rights. What is human rights is defined by them. Right. What is social justice is defined by them. Now China doesn't accept, I'm just using China as an example because they're very tough on this. They do not accept the Western idea of social justice. They say that according to our idea of social justice, you, the West, do not have social justice. We are the ones who have it. Okay. So they're tough enough to say that. So Western universalism puts you in that sort of a corner, and you are always in awe of the West, and you are always looking for Western legitimacy and pat on the back saying, okay, we'll give you this medal.
And let's say in the future then, so our children or our children's children, why is it, if things continue, does that problem still exist for them? And if so, is it worse?
Well, the thing is, we will have to accept, if the problem exists, we'll have to accept Western universalism as sort of the de facto world standard. And so if the West is going through a trauma, we'll have to go through the trauma. Like right now, the United States is going through wokeism. Sure. And so India has adopted wokeism. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in India is becoming wokist because it's in vogue in Harvard. And so it's good for him. good for his career.
Right.
So this means that he's not thinking for himself. His reference points are not the Vedic knowledge. His reference points are what Harvard says.
Okay.
So this idea that the Indian elite must always copy the Western paradigm, the Western role model, is a trap, and that's a mental trap because of Western universalism.
I think you've opened the door slightly there with the professor idea. So why is this a problem in academia then? And how does that academia disseminate into society for us all?
So the academic world is what I call a cartel of peers who reach a consensus among themselves and impose it on students. It's not really a place for free inquiry anymore. It should be, but that's not what it is. I'm very happy I addressed the students at King's College. I was told, somebody whispered to me before that there was a movement to cancel my talk, and that you should not speak on topics A, B, C. And I decided I will speak about those topics. But they told me that Kshitij Kapoor, the principal, heard both sides and decided that the talk will happen because he believes in free speech. So I'm very happy about that.
Sure.
But the trend in the humanities and liberal arts in the Western world has gone away from free speech towards wokeism, and that's it's a big shame.
Sure. I want to move on to the power of language, and so I know you've written a book called Sanskrit Non-Translatables. So before we get into that, could you tell me, Matt, perhaps what's the history of this deterioration? How has the language been taken from, say, the Dharmic traditions?
So the Sanskrit has been Sanskrit words don't always have an English equivalent. And this is not just true for Sanskrit. There are Chinese words because China had certain experiences. There are Arabic words. Eskimos have many words for snow and ice. And snow that's falling is different, large amount of snow, small amount of snow. Because they have so much snow and they have so many experiences about snow. So they have different words for it. It's okay. Now, the Sanskrit non-translatables captures, like the non-translatables of Chinese would capture or Eskimo language would capture, it captures some of the unique experiences that our ancient people had, so for which there are words. And so if we lose those, we lose that knowledge. The knowledge is contained in those words.
How was that language lost? Is it just colonialism over the last 1,000 years?
Well, that's a large part of it.
Sure.
Because as long as we had the oral tradition, the advantage of the oral tradition was that even if somebody came and burnt all your books, there were people who memorized it,
sure,
and they could put it back. They could bring it back. When the tradition of education was shifted from Sanskrit-based to English-based, and the Sanskrit language was eroded, there was a tendency, because of the inferiority complex of our people,
right,
there was a tendency that even those who knew the Sanskrit would try to show, I'm really smart, I know the English.
Yeah.
And they would, so our gurus go, even today, some of our gurus go around using English words which are not appropriate,
right,
which don't even make sense. For instance, pranayam is not breathing exercise, because pran is more than breathing. Pran is also living. Breathing, a heart-lung machine can breathe. But this heart-lung machine is not going to get enlightenment. It's not doing pranayam. You could have a robot doing pranayam, doing breathing exercises, but it's not doing pranayam. So, because pran is not breath. So that's the implication.
Fine. I remember actually growing up, I would look to my cousins in India and think, they can't speak English, they're not as clever or knowledgeable. But as I reflect now, those that struggle with English, they have first, second, sometimes it's the third or fourth language. So I think I've got great regard now for, people who haven't learned English so much or aren't able to translate it. So
on the one hand, the Western world is very full of this business about diversity. But what about diversity of language?
Yeah.
What about diversity of religions? What about diversity of cultures? They're killing that, and the death of languages is a kind of some kind of genocide. It's a cultural genocide.
Okay, so
when the Charter on Genocide was being drafted in the 1900s for the United Nations, the first draft included a category called cultural genocide.
Okay.
But that was removed, because then you wouldn't be able to have missionaries.
Right.
And then the whole Western experience would be considered cultural genocide.
Sure.
So the Western world made sure that the term cultural genocide was removed. It's only physical genocide that is in the law.
That's very clever. My next question was going to be this erosion. Was it through ignorance or malicious intent? And I think maybe you answered
Well,
that.
yeah, I think from the side of the dominating culture, they want to train the next few generations of the people that they are ruling over to think like them, to stop being too different, because they are very different. You cannot figure them out. Whereas if they are using your language, then you can understand. You can also teach them what you want them to know. Their own history books and books of philosophy are obsolete. They won't know how to access them. And that is in fact the case now. We have several million Sanskrit texts that have never been properly interpreted today. And there are few people who even know how to use them. Some of the texts have words that don't appear too many times. So it's not clear what exactly they mean, because people who knew all that are gone. So that's a serious problem.
Okay. So if we don't like the terms that are set out for us, will we want to define our own terms and words and have control of our language? But who then defines those terms? Sanatan Dharma, the Hindu lived experience, isn't centralized. Right? I often say you stand anywhere in India, travel 100 miles in any direction, you'll find people speak a different language, eat different food, pray differently, yet there's that fabric, which is the dharma of the land. So who defines our terms?
So this is very interesting. Sanskrit was the mother language in India. And this meant that the learned tradition, the tradition of high learning, would use Sanskrit to document its knowledge. It's not only religious. People are incorrect when they think that Sanskrit means Hindu thought, because there's mathematics, there's joke books, there is all sorts of books on cooking and medical books. So it's a language where the religious content is actually a minority if you look at the entire bibliography of known Sanskrit texts. There's books on architecture, there's books on all sorts of things. So the Sanskrit as the root language from which other languages emerged is a unifying factor. Now there is a folk language, which is different languages that popularly people speak, and then there is the formal language, sort of like since you are a tech person, so let's say there's a programming language, which is very formal. So you have to follow those rules. And there's a grammar and there's a syntax and all that stuff. And then there's this colloquial, casual sort of stuff, which is all the folk languages, the Gujaratis and the Punjabi, all that stuff is folk languages. But what would happen is there was a traffic of words and grammar between the two. Sanskrit was sort of the canonical form, the formal language, which would be the way all the learning would get represented, and the folk languages would innovate new words, come up with jargon, and so on. And the two would go back and forth. The grammar of Sanskrit was adopted by various languages, so they all got formalized and structured.
And mathematically very pure, and sort of there was a science and etymology to it all.
Yes.
So I think my question though was, who would define the terms? If we're talking about not being able to translate words and we have to live and breathe and work within the Western framework, like I was born in this country, educated here, I live here, I pay my taxes here, I am a British citizen, a proud British Indian, but I still have to engage with this Western world. How do we meaningfully do that if we have words that don't translate? Yeah,
so the byline of my book, Sanskrit Non-Translatable, the byline is the Sanskritization of English.
Okay.
So I'm proposing that we don't translate those words, we make them part of the English language.
Okay.
You make them part of it. Like there are French words. There are French words.
Yeah.
I mean, there are Spanish words. There are different words that have been brought into the English language. Why? There are some words we have brought in, like alu gobi, some stupid things like that.
Okay.
We brought some authors, silly authors, some authors that are very they thought that we'll bring in words like that and it'll become, hey, we are bringing Indian stuff into English. But the serious words that contain deep philosophical meaning are the ones that we should introduce to enrich the English language. By Sanskritizing the English language, I mean expand its body of ideas by introducing new ideas which are captured in these words.
I'm on board with that. What would be the top 5 words that we should bring in?
Well, I think you should start with Shakti, you should start with Prana, you should start with Atma, And the book Sanskrit Non-Translatables, I don't know if you have it available here, it has 54 words.
Okay.
It has 54 words. I wanted to do 108, and this book it would become twice as big. So I said I'll do 54 for now,
Right.
and maybe somebody else will do 54, or we will do 54 together. But there are non-translatables in Ayurveda. So there are certain ways of diagnosing body conditions that are very unique to the Ayurvedic system.
Right.
There are non-translatables in Yoga Sutra. Word like samadhi. Those are non-translatable. There are words in Jyotish Shastra, in astrology, in Ganit Shastra, which is mathematics. So every domain of knowledge has its own non-translatables that are unique to that system, because that system was so specialized. It discovered things like, you'd see chemistry people discovered they come up with jargon in chemistry.
Sure. Okay.
And medical people have medical terms. So there's nothing unusual about having domain-specific non-translatables.
Sure. So Rajiv Ji's opened the door, written 54 of those. I wonder who, if anyone in the audience, may be the author that brings the next book around of these non-translatables. And actually that's a call to action for the audience as well. It's great that we're all here listening live to this podcast with Rajiv Ji, but what work of your own are you going to do? How are you going to celebrate this diverse culture, the plurality that we are able to bring to society? So we'll get back into the conversation with Rajiv Ji here about that. What do you think are the biggest challenges for the Hindu society of today?
Well, it might be a bit of a challenge, a bit of a unpopular thing for me to say.
Sure.
But I think the biggest challenges are the Hindus.
Okay.
The biggest challenge facing Hindu society are the Hindus, because Hindus are not doing justice to their own tradition. When I criticize Hindus today, people say, but you are so proud of your Vedic heritage. So the Vedic heritage is very different from the lived reality of Hindus today. I mean, you could be a great fan of cricket and you could say that the current cricket team is no good. It's not a contradiction.
Okay.
So I feel that the Vedic tradition and the Hindu tradition and all the Shastras, all the philosophies and all that it has to offer is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. It should be the future guiding principle for all of humanity. But I feel that the Hindus today do not live up to that. I mean, they do not live up to it in terms of their contribution to it, their ability to get beyond ego and serve the tradition. They're all running their own little things, very selfish, and they are willing to commit to a lot for their own personal success and their family, but they are not willing to give up much to help the society, help Hindu Dharma itself. And I criticize the temples, because they are also little businesses and they are not sticking their neck out serving the society when there's an issue. Like, let's say there's an issue in a part of Britain, there's some riot or something like that happens, and the Hindu community needs help. Many of these temples will sort of keep out of it because they don't want to rock the boat. So there's a lot of problems like that. And I think that the Hindu politics is using Hinduism as a vote bank to get elected, which is fine, which we need. But then upon being elected are not necessarily doing all the things that they should do. For instance, Hindu temples are controlled by the government in India. Mosques are not, gurdwaras are not, churches are not, only temples are. That's actually quite a disgrace. So I can go on and tell you a whole lot of things that are not right as far as Hindu society is concerned and the Hindus are concerned, but this is not a problem with Hinduism itself. It's a problem with today's generation.
Okay. So, some of those things are happening perhaps in India. I mean, like I say, I live here, Vichaar Manthan is a British organisation. The people of the West, the Hindus of the West, and maybe if there are not criticisms, what are some quick wins for them to be had? So
I think that the temples in the West are not doing the job that temples should do. They're just bhakti centers. Okay. They're collecting money and doing worship, which is fine, which is one part, but they're also supposed to be centers of karma and outreach and social activities like NGOs are doing. That's the job of the traditional mandir. They are centers of philosophy, they're centers of learning, they're centers of Vichaar Manthan type of, they are the places that should be educating, writing textbooks for us, running universities for us. So you do find the Catholic Church doing that. And long before there existed a Catholic Church, the Hindu mandir and the Hindu institutions would do that for Hindu society. So we kind of dismantle and shrunk the role of the temple down to a very private, you go there quietly like you're doing something wrong and nobody should see you, and you go quietly and do this puja and come out, and they are not able to be out there in society and take a stand because they are afraid of being political and being social. But they're supposed to intervene in social issues.
Sure.
That they're supposed to provide guidance to the public on social issues, controversial issues, but they're not equipped to do that.
And so other organizations that sprout up, you talked about sort of Vichaar Manthan being a place to write papers or influence academia. Do other factions of society need to pick up that mantle where perhaps the Mandars of today are not, and is that okay?
Yeah, so right now what has happened is we have a fragmented Hindu renaissance. So there is the Vichaar Manthan, there are people running for office politically and they are doing something, and then there is bhakti going on in the temples, and there are some yoga studios doing their thing. So this is not integrated like it used to be. And I think that's a large part of the problem. The Hindu money is going to temples, and a lot of organizations like you have a call to action for funding Vichaar Manthan, and you want £1 a month. The point is that it would be your entire year's budget would be one day's amount that collected in a temple.
Sure.
And they could just fund it like that. I mean, I propose all sorts of things. They should have a chapter, these big temples should have a chapter in every university to serve the needs of students, every university. They should have a chapter, they should have training for police, they should have a training for MPs, they should have a training for media, journalism. I mean, the church does it, the Jewish people do it, the Muslim people are doing it. I mean, they have programs to influence journalism around the world, and they spend money to do that. We are not doing those things. So I think these are the problems of Hinduism are all problems of that, or self-made problems of the Hindus not investing enough in our own civilization.
Sure.
We want to harvest the fruits without nurturing the roots. You have to feed the roots, and then you are entitled to the fruits. Otherwise, you're stealing.
Okay, no, very great words here from Rajiv Ji. Live on the Vichaar Manthan podcast. Hopefully, you're tuning in from around the world. We're happy, like we mentioned at the start, to be streaming into 35 countries around the planet. And as Rajiv Ji mentioned here today, we need to invest in ideas that matter. So people, time, money, and institutions. These are the four things that any great idea needs to bear fruit, to be watered, to receive those nutrients. So you would have heard a call to action here today to sign up onto the Vichaar Manthan Well Wishes Fund to enable us to put on events like this, to enable us to write papers and create book clubs. And so I have a call to action to everyone sitting here live, who's very fortunate to be listening to us live here in London, to sign up to that Well Wishes Fund at the end, and look at vichaarmanthan.org to see all the previous work and podcast episodes that have been streamed.
Now, this reminds me of something. A very good Muslim friend of mine told me, he said, you have spent 30 years doing all this, and look at the little support you're getting. He said, you are the right guy, but in the wrong religion. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, a person doing 1/10 as much as you, if you were in my religion, you would have received all kind of support. And I found that I couldn't respond to that.
It's not like the money doesn't exist.
It's not. And a Chinese guy told me the same thing. He said, this talk you gave here, this talk you gave there. In our country, if there's a businessman who says, I give up my business to do this, the government, the culture ministry and all that will embrace this guy, make him cultural ambassador and tell him, you be out there and we'll help you. Sure. We'll give you resources. Sure. So one is a religion-based comparison that the Muslim gave. One is a secular political comparison that the Chinese gave. And I must say, I'm very disappointed with the Hindu community.
Sure. Well, hopefully we can change that. There are books for sale today, but I want to dive deeper into your book, Being Different. And I'm just going to read a short extract from Rita Sharma, academic, who's written about your book, Being Different. So, with stunning honesty, Being Different alerts the reader to the grave dangers of a difference-negating sameness that is marketed worldwide by secular and religious streams in Western culture. This is a very important and highly accessible book in the discourse of the interaction between civilizations. And I think it is a war of civilizations. There are differences in, say, the Abrahamic-based, the Dharmic-based civilizations, and I think you dive quite deeply into that, into this book here. But one thing I wanted you to help our audience understand in a little bit more detail was this idea of integral unity versus synthetic unity? Do you help us understand that?
Yeah, amazing. Good question. This is my favorite question, in fact. You know, if you have think of a tree and you have a single DNA and the roots from that DNA emerge into such a diverse tree. So many branches, so many leaves, so many flowers, so many fruits, all kinds of things, but unified with a common source, everything out of one thing. Whereas if you look at an automobile, there is no one DNA and root system that produced all of it. The tire is made in a tire factory, the battery is made in a battery factory, the paint comes from here, the steering comes from somewhere. There are different things made and put together, stuck together. So that's a synthetic unity. The integral unity is a unity where where the parts are emerging out of the one thing, and they didn't exist separately. The parts don't even exist separately. They have no separate existence. It makes no sense because they wouldn't be able to survive separately. In a synthetic unity is one where the parts pre-exist and then they are put together. Now, the reason the way this applies to philosophy is that if Brahman, the one, manifests as everything, from the electron to the clouds to the mountain to our conversation to the language, every physical entity, mental entity, emotional entity, everything that exists, the time itself, space itself, are basically manifestations and aspects and forms of that Brahman, then this is a synthetic, an integral unity. But in the case of the Abrahamic system, it is not God who becomes the universe. The God is separate from the universe, stays out of the universe. This is very important. God stays out of the universe. And so he makes the universe, so the universe is a separate entity, God from God. So the world consists of God, souls that are separate from God, and the physical cosmos. The three things have to be reconciled. So the West is always struggling to figure out how they work together. How did this happen? How did that happen? What's the relationship? And this is a synthetic unity. And so that is one example of a synthetic unity. A very important example is the concept of the West. The West is a synthetic unity from the Judeo-Christian biblical side and the Hebraic and the Hellenistic side. Because the Greek thought, which is Hellenistic thought, was nothing compatible with the Abrahamic thought. Totally different. They didn't have this idea of an external God who created this world, and they were not history-centric. They were more like the Vedic culture, actually, in many ways. So the forced unity of the religious side and the philosophical side is a synthetic unity, and that's what we call the West. The West is a synthetic unity. Sure. And under pressure, at times of stress, it falls apart. The West is always worried about falling apart. The West has always got this anxiety that, if we are not in control, if I'm not a powerful guy and beating this guy and controlling that guy, I may fall apart.
You talk about this where there is then a need for conflict or a war or something to be saved from.
Something to be saved from, and I have to always have the other that I'm going after in order to protect my own survival. So the reason they must convert you is because your very existence as a Hindu is a threat to my Christianity. Even though we would say, how the hell am I threatening your Christianity? But the fact that you are there and you're happy and you're legitimate and you're okay is a threat to my claims of exclusivity.
You talk of embodied knowing.
Yes.
So the inner science and experience. Why do you think the West has abandoned that? Why is my being Hindu a threat to that?
So embodied knowing means that because I am the ultimate supreme being, I am the ultimate reality, a manifestation of that. I don't need to bring truth from somewhere else. I can rediscover that in me. I have to undo all the conditioning. I have to undo all the blockages, all the ignorance that is a veil covering up this insight. So as I advance my spiritual practice, I get rid of all this nonsense that is covering up and I discover myself. Now that is the embodied knowing, meaning that the knowing, ultimate knowing, is embodied in me. Whereas in the Western world, that is not available because you are not Sat Chit Anand. We call the word Sat Chit Anand means the essential divine is inside you. You are the divine essence. Your essence is divine. that is not available to the Abrahamic world because God is somewhere else, and you are a born sinner. In fact, you're a born sinner.
Sure.
So until you've been saved through some external agency, you are a sinner. And so this means that the idea of embodied knowing is not available.
Okay.
That is why the Anglican Church has some problems with yoga, because they often feel that yoga will invite the devil.
Okay.
The silence is dangerous because the devil will come in and fill the vacuum.
Okay.
So to us, silence is what you start with to discover yourself, and you invite the divine. So that is how deep how fundamental the conflicts are.
The system sounds somewhat rigged and doesn't allow for chaos and disorder.
Yes.
And so you suggest that Dharmic civilizations are much better able to deal with that chaos.
Yes.
What is the cause of this? Why is that Western university not able to? So
since my ultimate reality is what it is, there is nothing ultimately that can go wrong because I'm okay, I'm secure. That gives me security. It tells me, the idea that there's reincarnation tells me there's no hurry. It's not like I'm going to hell. If I don't figure it out this time, I'm going to go to hell, and that's eternal. I'll never get out of there. So that's pretty bad news. So that gives me an anxiety to save myself, and then I have to go running saying, can you save me? Or is he better at saving me? Are you authentic? Or is this guy authentic? Maybe this church is better, maybe that guy is better. So I have an anxiety, time is running out, and before I die, I have to get saved, otherwise I'm doomed. So this kind of a thing, it drives the whole, is obsessive, and it drives the whole civilization. We are more relaxed about it. Things can go wrong, maybe the lights will go off, then they'll come back on. Because firstly, time is infinite for us. It's not a finite time because we got reincarnated. Also, my ultimate essence, my real deepest foundation is the one. And so, what can go wrong? Maybe this body will suffer, but then that's also temporary. So the sense of security which the Vedic metaphysics gives us this complacency. It also is a problem. I can also become lazy. I can also say, I can be complacent and say, ho jayega, agle zaman mein ho jayega, and if it's bad, tomorrow will be a nice day. So the West has the advantage of saying, really being kind of gung-ho and obsessive and saying, let's go kick ass and do something to get out, to fix the problem. So that is the advantage they have in a certain sense. The obsession for order is also an advantage because you become a good project manager perhaps, because you can run a military that way. You can run any sort of a system that requires an algorithm that everybody should be forced under. You need people who can have order.
Sure.
So whereas in our case, the system is better if the people are evolved yogis and they are self-organized and they don't need an external agency pressuring them and forcing them in a certain direction because they're okay on their own. So our system relies on people looking after themselves, becoming and not dependent on an authority. Ours is more like do-it-yourself. I mean, our spirituality is, Hinduism is a do-it-yourself faith.
It's a tough gig. The onus is on me. The responsibility is here for me to do the work.
Right. And they are guides and they are guides, but I don't have to believe in them. I can even say to hell with you, and there's no authority that will come after me. I can say I reject all this. And most of our exemplars were people who self-discovered. Sure. Their enlightenment is not something that somebody else gave them. They just discovered this on their own. So this dependency on an institution in the Western world is a handicap to creativity and a concern and a fear of disorder and chaos. But at the same time, it makes them team players. Yeah. So you follow the captain. You don't go and say, okay, the captain said this, but to hell with him.
Keep everyone in the
Keep everyone in line. Sure. So where you need order, you need you need a factory, you need a military. I mean, there are places where order is very good. And it's not necessarily that being very spontaneous and decentralized is not always good. The decentralized nature of intelligence in the Hindu system has its advantages in terms of free thought, sure, creativity, but the disadvantage of fragmentation and sure, things going wrong.
Okay. And I think we'll go into plurality in a little bit more detail at the moment. So, Rajiv Ji, I understand you haven't heard the Vichaar Manthan podcast yourself. Maybe you will after this recording. But for those of you that do, you'll know we are going to enter what I call the rapid fire round. So,
Okay.
rapid set of questions, one word or one sentence answers at max, and we'll try and fire through some of these.
Okay.
What's the best piece of advice anyone has ever given you?
To not depend on anything outside myself.
Okay. What goes into your perfect breakfast smoothie?
Water.
What? Okay, fine. Do you have a favorite book that is not your own?
Bhagavad Gita.
Okay.
I have read it dozens of times, and every time I learn something new.
If you could have a superpower, what would that be?
Being able to live with myself longer and longer and longer. I'm able to do it quite a bit, by the way.
Okay.
I used to be very agitated for a few minutes, but I can be in silence, stillness, enjoy myself for quite a while. But I'd like to go further.
Do you have a favorite quote?
All the Vedic quotes are
One
fantastic, but my favorite, the favorite quote that I keep reminding myself is the idea that I am Brahman is a very powerful idea because it reminds us of who we ultimately are, what our responsibility is. It carries a lot of responsibility with it. And it also says that you too are the same. And therefore, whether we agree or disagree or get into a fight, that's only at one level. Okay. But deep inside, we have to be respecting each other. So it's a personal psychology, and it's also interaction, pluralism, respect for each other. It's a social philosophy.
Who have you met that has inspired you the most?
My mother, who just passed away a year and a half ago at the age of 95, was an amazing person, a medical doctor, gold medalist at a time when she was one of the first batches when they had women doctors, a very tough, empowered person, deeply spiritual, no-nonsense person, a survivor of the partition, all the horrors that Punjabi people faced during the partition, and a great source of inspiration.
Very nice, thank you. If you were stranded on a deserted island, what 3 items would you take with you?
Well, I would probably take some medicines. Okay. At this age, I need some. And assuming this island is surrounded by sea water, I would need a lot of water. Sure. I won't want to take that. So if I have my medicine, then I have my water. I think I'm pretty much okay, so I'll give the third to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Is there anything that keeps you awake at night?
Yes. Right now, running the institution of Infinity Foundation gives me responsibilities over other people, which I didn't have several years ago. When I left the business world, I left it to get rid of all these responsibilities and explore myself. But then I sort of said, we should also help these other kids. They want to learn, they should have successors. So now I've adopted a whole lot of these young people, I'm mentoring them, and that gives me responsibilities. So I often, they wonder, this guy never sleeps because at 3 in the morning I'm responding to some message and all that. Sure. So I'm running a real-time kind of in two locations, India and US, and that keeps me up.
Okay. Has there been a moment in your life that you would describe as a paradigm shift?
Yes, of course. My paradigm shift is what led me to give up my businesses and do this full time, with no salary, no income, nothing, for the last 30 years and never look back. So obviously that has to be a very powerful experience to be able to say, listen, I don't need to make money, I don't need to go and chase this or that. I have it inside. I need to go and explore and find more about it. And that happens only when you've had that experience. When you've had an experience, then nobody can talk you out of it because it's my experience. I've had it. It's not about somebody else convincing me. I don't depend on anyone else to tell me about it because I've tasted it. And once you've tasted it, then it'll never leave you, and you just want to go back to it and taste it again and again, and let it guide you deeper and deeper to wherever it leads. So that is the paradigm shift. I'm extremely lucky because our traditions sometimes makes it sound like you should continue living a life of worldly things until you're very old. But in my case, in my early 40s, in the prime of my life, when I still had good health and energy and many decades ahead of me, I had that shift. So I decided I should not miss this opportunity.
Which 3 people would you invite to dinner and why?
I would love to invite you.
Okay.
Tonight we'll having dinner. We'll have dinner. But I would invite people that I can learn from. So I would invite, in fact, not people who are on the same path, but I would love to have people who are on different paths, but who have this mutual respect. People I can really debate honestly, with nothing personal, no slander and all that, open minds, people who come from different traditions.
Is there anyone dead or alive that you could name?
Well, I would love to have, there are some philosophers, for instance, from our tradition we have Adi Shankara, but I don't necessarily agree with him, although I'm a Vedantin and Advait Vedantin, but I would like to throw certain questions to him. I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm also a Buddhist, by the way. I would love to have that kind of interaction. And I think that I'm not as convinced that a conversation with some of the prophets would be useful to me, because I think it's too dogmatic. But there are philosophers, there's Plato, there is Aquinas, there are very smart people in the Western tradition that I have read a lot and I've learned a lot from them, and would love to get deeper into their skin than what the documented history tells us, because I think the history is very superficial.
Sure. Let's do a couple of quick ones. Could you, if you could, define dharma?
Dharma is alignment with the cosmos.
What is sustainability?
Sustainability is alignment with the cosmos.
Okay. Interchangeable? We can
Yes.
use these two
Yeah,
words?
you can. Sustainability is sort of a Western term, but I think that we don't need the Western term at all. The dharma is actually the term. The yajna is another term, which is that you are engaged in a process which is an ecological process of giving back, because you're receiving things and you're giving back, and that's sustainability. So yajna is the process of sustainability, the human action for ensuring sustainability, because each time I breathe, I'm consuming something, and everything I get, I've been given, and yajna is to give back.
Okay. So on the topic of sustainability, with sustainability comes a requirement for commitment. So I ask all my guests on the podcast, is there a commitment you would like to make live to our audience? Is there something in your life that you should be doing more or haven't quite yet got round to?
Well, there are personal things
There
are personal things for myself, but those are not beneficial to you.
Sure.
I am extremely impressed by the group of people that hosted this trip of mine. And the commitment I'm making is I'd like to come back at least once a year to Britain, and not only engage the same organizations that I did, but even more of them, because this is the first time. I have been to Britain about 100 times. I used to be a consultant for British Telecom, and I used to come and ran some software houses in Britain. But this is the first time that I have experienced a whole different kind of British energy from Indians here. I don't know if you agree with this, but I think this kind of energy didn't exist even 5 years ago.
I don't think so. So Vichaar Manthan's been around for maybe 10 plus years, but it's only in the last few years we're coming to a fruition, hosting ourselves at a place like this.
Because you came on board.
Not just me. There's a whole bunch of volunteers who are full-time working professionals and give up their personal time for an organization like this. So I mentioned earlier, time, money, people, and institutions. Those are the 4 things you need to make an idea a good idea, for it to flourish throughout society. And we'll cover some more with Rajiv Ji. So we'll end the rapid fire round there. We can get back into more of a conversation. And I wanted to talk to you about something you've outlined in this book again. And I heard it on one of your talks I think you gave in Chicago. And you touched on the history, centricism, but the difference in Shruti and Smriti, and why that's important for us to recognize.
It's a very important question. So Shruti are the eternal truths that have been discovered by the rishis, and they are available for each of us to discover for ourselves, and hence not an article of faith that you have to take at face value. You can start with the Shruti as a kind of a guiding principle, but ultimately you discover it for yourself. That's a very interesting differentiation between Shruti and dogma. Smriti is every time, place, context, every culture, every country has different circumstances, and you have to apply this universal truth to that context. So the Smriti, so we have to write the Hindu Smriti for today, and actually the Indian constitution for India would be its Smriti, but it's not written properly from a Vedic point of view. But if it were, that would be the Smriti. So you need to write a Smriti for how you conduct yourself, Smriti for family life, Smriti for legal matters, for social economic matters. So the Smritis are practical texts that are sort of like policies. Policies are Smritis.
Okay.
Policies are Smritis. So these change with time and with context. So you see, the problem with the Abrahamic religions is that the Shruti and Smriti got combined and collapsed and frozen as a book, one book. And therefore, what parts of the Bible may have been Smritis only for that time.
Right.
And they should have kept that part of it separate from the Shrutis, which are eternal. And parts of the Quran may be Smritis relevant for people in the desert facing certain circumstances, and they are not Shrutis. But because it's one book and they said you cannot change it and you cannot disagree with it and all that, so they're stuck in a corner and they cannot evolve. We don't have that problem.
Right. And that allows us to be agile, adaptable, and
yes,
allows for Dharma to be timeless, therefore.
That's correct.
And so each person today, 10, 20 years from now, can take the values of flourishing, sustainability, and apply it to modernity.
Right. And so when people attack Manu Smriti because it says horrible things, it's a Smriti and you can reject it. Manu himself says that all his writings are relevant for a certain time and place and should be replaced where if in a certain situation they don't work, then change them. Manu has no problem. He's not freezing the dogma and saying this is permanent forever. You can abandon Manu Smriti, and Manu doesn't have a problem. Or you can rewrite certain texts, but you cannot remove even one verse from any of the Abrahamic holy books. That's the difference.
Sure. How would you respond to those who suggest that pro-Hindu movements seek to homogenize the diversity of Hindu cultural practice?
That's not the case, because pro-Hindu movements, if they are authentic, they are accepting the diversity of different forms of worship. There's so many different kinds of deities. There are so many rituals and agamas you can choose to do or not do. There are so many different interpretations of the Supreme Person, and so many philosophies and sub-philosophies within them. So there is a diversity of ideas and there's a diversity of practices, and these are respected, and that's not a homogenization. Also, as far as the Hindu philosophy basically says, the Ayurveda says that your body type is different from somebody else's body type, and what is good for you is not necessarily good for me. So even medicine is personalized. So that's diversity. So there's diversity of music. The rag you play in the morning is different from the rag you play in the evening. There is different rag for a certain season. When it's raining, you play a different rag. So there is diversity because every single entity is the Supreme Person in another form. So the same one becomes the flower, becomes the bird, becomes the tiger, becomes the deer, becomes the human, becomes the good guy, becomes the bad guy, all of that. The Bin Laden is the manifestation of the same one. So the respect for diversity is absolutely endless in Hindu tradition. I would not accept at all that being a Hindu makes you homogenized. I think that's the homogenization is being forced, is what we want to resist, because it's being forced on us. For us to accept that Hinduism equals homogenization would be kind of death for us.
Okay. And so this plurality you talk of, and you've been doing this for a number of decades, right? Researching Indic thought, thinking about Hindu Sanatana Dharma, how it applies to modern day life. What, in your experience, have been the biggest changes in this Dharmic idea space in, say, the last 30 years?
I think when I started, there was no support, and now the issues I raised are big issues all over the place. I had difficulty going to VHP wouldn't want to know that I'm complaining about these issues because they said, no, we don't want to rock the boat. The Indian consulates and embassies and high commissions didn't want anything to do with it. The gurus were all into sort of goody, everything's okay. I think the problems and the issues have surfaced over time to such an extent that people are able to accept them and do something about it. So we haven't solved the problem, but we certainly understand the problems a lot better than we used to. So that's a big advancement, that there is awareness. Plus, I think a whole lot of grassroots organizations have come up, like yours, many others. I've been hosted by 7 or 8 different organizations in Britain, and they're all new. And so this is very exciting and very healthy. These are decentralized. There is no one top-down authority that has produced all of these. And even if there is a kind of a parent umbrella, it is very loose, and it allows flexibility, it allows entrepreneurship. So I'm excited about the future from that point of view. I'm only concerned that it's taking a long time and things against us are moving faster. That's my concern. It's the relative speed of solutions and problems.
Sure. What's your message for the Hindu society then to coherently and progressively move forward? What 3-4 steps could one undertake?
So I would say that we need to have a Hindu manifesto, which says with all the diversity there are some common principles. Like I've tried to lay out some common principles. So not a huge document, but 1 or 2 pages. So this should be very deep, well thought out. It should be done not by one person, but a group of people who are representing the diversity, so that we are all capturing. There are some philosophical common tenets like karma idea and reincarnation idea are philosophical elements. Then there are some social elements about my commitment to the cause. What are some of the tenets from some of the things I don't want to believe. So the principle of mutual respect. But this respect is not unilateral, it's mutual. I respect you, but provided I also want you to respect me. It's not like I'm just a pushover and you can just walk all over me. So some manifesto, the single most important thing we need to do is the different leaders need to come together and develop a Hindu manifesto. And those who believe in it should sign it, have a petition to get more people in it, which respects everybody's diversity in their own way, but there are some common principles, and one of them should be we come to each other's defense. Okay. If something happens to you, I'm there for you.
It sounds like a big feat, and I wouldn't know where to start to put something like that together. Hopefully we can lean on your wisdom in that regard. So I think you're saying we should be embracing this plurality, the multiple ways of looking at it. So are you saying one civilization has all the answers?
No, I think that we need a seat at the table as a civilization among all others. We should not be arrogant and say nobody else should be there. That would be dictatorial and antithetical to our strength. So the different civilizations need, like there's a United Nations which is for nation states. Right. There needs to be something for civilizations.
Sure. How do you encourage people to start thinking about these things, start studying these things? When, let's just say the money is available, but to go, let's just say I wanted to learn Sanskrit. I have a full-time job. I couldn't possibly split my time in such a way. And even if I did go and get a PhD, there's no money, there's no job for me at the end of that. How is that a sustainable, realistic society?
So one of the problems we have is we have not invested in resources to sustain certain human resources. In our tradition, there were people who would be sustained by society from donations.
Right.
They would, because these people were an asset. They were a social asset, a community asset. They're doing things that are helping all of us, and so we would support them. Like we support police and we support authorities because they're looking after us. So these are the teachers, the exemplars, the spiritual leaders were supported, and all the knowledge producers today and the people who are disseminating this knowledge to our society need to be supported. But there is no such thing as a Hindu tax. We don't have that system. There is in Germany. There's a Christian tax. The church has a tax in Germany, even though they say that they are secular and all that. But there is a Christian tax. It's specifically Christian church. It's not Buddhist or Hindu or anybody else who can take that tax. So we don't have that kind of a system, and I'm not advocating that we should. It's voluntary, but that unless all of us voluntarily give back as our yajna, that this is my contribution to something that is not selfish, is not going to help me or my family, but unless we do that, we are not going to survive.
Okay, deep words here today, live on the Vichaar Manthan podcast. And for those listening at home, remember we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, YouTube, and all streaming platforms. And before we get into the questions, Rajiv Ji, last couple of questions here in this section of this podcast episode. What's your parting message? You've been here in the UK on tour, and you're pleasantly impressed by the organisations that have hosted you. What's different? What's your vision for the 20 years based on your prescription? So
I would request Hindus in this country to join one or more of these organisations in a not a casual manner, but in a very serious manner. I don't have an organization in Britain. I don't want to start one. I'd like the existing ones to be strengthened. I'd like to support them in whatever way I can, through Zooms, through coming back and doing these tours. But I want to champion. I want their success, because this is a new ecosystem that didn't exist previously. So all of you should pick whichever one or two organizations that are in this space. That have helped this tour of mine. They're all very good, and pick the one that you relate to, join it, and contribute to it. That's what I would like to see happen. So I would love to come back next year and see much bigger, participation from our community, and people with deep pockets should be more generous. People with deep pockets, they're not going to take any money away. Some with them, they're better off giving back and having good karma than just accumulating more money selfishly. So those are my suggestions.
And if everyone got on board with the ideas, invested in these systems, in these organisations, and followed your prescription, what does a 10 or a 20-year future look like for?
I think we will not only be a more secure and successful community, but I think Britain will be better off. Okay. I think Britain will be better off because we, having a seat at the table in coming up with policies and ideas, we could help Britain in health-wise, emotional health and spiritual health-wise, harmony among all the diverse people that exist here. A place where there's more success, commercial business success, because clear-thinking people, honest, ethical people will do a better job. So our tradition brings many kinds of values for the success of society.
I'm personally quite passionate about unlocking the wisdom in our ancestry. We've spoken about a few topics, planetary system, math, science, physics, English, society, governance models are applicable to modern day life. So personally, I'm passionate about these things. How would we encourage someone listening at home, or how would they help their kids read more about Dharma? How would they not be so woke?
So they have, see, the problem we're having is parents have kind of abandoned their role. Parents have turned this over to media and to schools. And what about parenting? So you as parents should read some of these books yourself, and then bring it down to the level of a child and explain to them little ideas, because you'll be rich in the process, the child will be rich, and you'll be a better family, a closer family. So the re-education of the Hindu community has to begin at home. And there's a role for the gurus and the mandirs to go beyond rituals and bhakti and become educators. Some of them are already doing it. ISKCON is running some schools. Some of our mandirs are already following this advice.
Sure, thank you. I'm going to go to the first question here from Nikki G. Mystery. Do you think that Indian secular socialism was the Trojan horse that facilitated the integration of critical theory into Indian society?
So, secularism is not. Secularism claims to be the way to have a pluralistic society, because religions are going to fight, and so if you secularize, they'll all be kind of put aside, and maybe there'll be more coexistence. It hasn't worked that way. Dharma accommodates the diversity of faiths within itself. Dharma doesn't prevent there being a Jesus Dharma, for example. You could have a Jesus Dharma, and Dharma says that's fine. You could have your own yogi, your guru, you could have your own avatar. I mean, we are not a closed system, it's an open architecture. We don't say that the historical experiences we had are all the historical experiences that matter. The historical experiences that we had in India and in our itihas and in our Puranas are what we believe in. But if in your part of the world you had some other historical experiences, we have no business to negate that. So we have a good foundation on which this kind of a diversity could coexist.
Thank you. Got one here that says, what advice will you give people who want to contribute to our Dharma but are entangled in the world to earn and save for the future in this highly material world? Well, I think this is bringing Dharma to modern day life. How do we do that?
Right. So if you have money, at least some money, you should donate regularly to one of these organizations. You should definitely do that. If you are a student and you don't have money, you should volunteer, give your time, which is something more precious than that. If you, at the very least, you should invest in upgrading your own knowledge and not be ignorant. You should definitely invest in learning, set aside a certain amount of time. You see, there's so much time being wasted. Nobody can tell me that they're too busy because they're on the phone, they're looking at social media, they're watching this, that nonsense stuff. And so, so there is time that you could give to self-improvement. And you should think of Hinduism as self-improvement.
Sure. Got one here from Animeshji Mishra. Why has our famed creativity gone missing, and how do we bring it back?
The British wanted an education system to produce clerks, followers, obedient, rule followers, not people who could think for themselves, because that would be very dangerous. If you could think for yourself, then you might revolt. It's better to have you obedient, and so they appointed zamindars. Zamindars were tough people controlling the public, and they would get patronage and support from the British. They could extract taxes. So there's a whole system of a hierarchy system of oppression, and so we lost creativity in that way. We also lost creativity during the Islamic invasions, because when people are running away to save themselves, they're not sitting with the luxury of creativity. They have to save their lives. So this 1,000, 1,200 years or more of being invaded and enslaved in various ways, colonized, enslaved, whatever, it certainly has a huge damaging effect on your mental abilities. And so I would say that Indians have gone down in their mental faculties. I think Indian mental faculty of the population is not that sharp, not as sharp as it used to be, because you don't find people coming up with these amazing insights on the same scale. And India used to be the land that where people sent all their brightest kids to learn. We were the Ivy Leagues. Our universities were like the Ivy Leagues at the time.
So if the very nature of society, the faculties you speak of are weak, where's that resurgence come from?
So the resurgence comes from yoga meditation and the inner journey that has not been tampered with. Those tools are available. They're as available now as they were in the past. You need to join an organization that will teach you the inner sciences, the path within that can take you forward as a person. That'll give you more memory, that'll give you clearer thinking, you'll become more intelligent, hardworking, more stable, better disciplined, it'll improve your personal life. So I would say that's a one hell of a self-improvement opportunity that all of you should take care of.
Sure. if we bolster the Hindu identity, doesn't that fragment British society?
No, because Hindu identity does not usurp or tamper with the political system that you're in. I mean, it's very pragmatic. You have to live within a certain political system, and Indians are very adaptive. And this is why wokeism is accusing people like me of being white adjacent. The term white adjacent is used for Indians in the United States, meaning you're not white people, but you are doing very well in the structures that were created by white people, and they were created by white people to oppress non-whites, and even though you may be non-white, but you are enjoying the benefit of those structures. And so you are white adjacent, meaning you are aligned with the whites in helping those structures thrive. So when you do good in the corporate world, that corporate world is able to survive. Their structures are able to survive because of your help. You're participating in it. So in other words, we are supposed to abandon our success in order to comply with the wokists.
Sure. Okay. I think that goes quite nicely into this next question from Jairamji. How does an open, inclusive system manage contact with a rigid, exclusive system without becoming rigid itself?
So I assume the former is the Hindu dharma he's talking about, and we have to engage other systems that are rigid, aggressive, and the question is, how do we Hindus protect ourselves against violent religions without resorting to violence ourselves? That's a more direct way of saying the same thing. How do we do that? But this is where Kshatriyata comes in. I mean, the Gita is very clear. If you have to fight, you have to fight. You're not fighting for selfish reasons. You're not fighting out of hatred for that person. You're not fighting to take over his kingdom, his empire, and enslave him. You're fighting out of defense. You're fighting because the guy leaves you no choices. You have tried to negotiate. Sri Krishna goes and tries to negotiate, and when all options fail, then if violence is the only method left, you have to resort to it. So when you defend yourself physically also, it is within the dharma. You have a right and an obligation to defend yourself. It's not that you have to give up and just succumb to somebody oppressing you. So I think the peaceful, loving faith that you have to have should always be the first choice. But if required, if as a matter of self-defense you have to fight, you have to fight.
Sure. Next question here from Charlotte Littlewood. By saying this faith doesn't work for society, well-being, but this belief system does, are you adding more supremacy to a current crisis of supremacist thinking?
So I didn't understand the first part of it, yeah.
So by saying this faith doesn't work for society, but this belief system does, are you adding more?
When they say this faith doesn't work for society, which faith are they referring?
I think we're talking about Western Universalism.
Okay, so if Western Universalism doesn't work for society, and then?
And so are we adding more supremacy? Is the Indian
No, but okay, so maybe the question is that if I'm against Western Universalism, am I promoting Indian Universalism?
Sure.
And I'm not. Okay. I'm saying that all faiths, all universalism, all universal claims should be having a seat at the table. There should be multiple options. That is what pluralism is, that is what diversity is. So Western Universalism actually reduces diversity because it forces a certain value system on everybody. And therefore, if you don't have Western Universalism but let many different worldviews prevail, it's good.
Sure. So lots more questions here. We won't be able to get through them all. There may be some time afterwards where Rajiv Ji will be signing some books, and you can see some of his books on the table at the end. So we're coming up towards the end of this podcast. I've certainly enjoyed myself, Rajiv Ji. Thank you for joining us here today. Final question from my side then. Is there a particular call to action? Is there something our audience could take away from today? If someone's listening to this podcast later on down the line, what's the parting message that Rajiv Ji wants to share with British India?
So I would say, whatever you like, dislike, whatever it is, become active and engaged in British society as Hindus, as Indians. Even if you reject everything I'm saying, but there must be something else, some other group that you want to belong to. Don't be apathetic and just sit around and run a selfish, indulgent life, which is unfortunately where our people have ended up. So get involved is what I'm saying. Involved in something, whatever it is, even if it's something that I would never do myself, but you ought to get out of your comfort zone and your laziness, which is tamasic, become at least rajasic.
Thank you very much, Rajiv Ji. So for everyone joining us here today, thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
So this podcast was recorded live in central London. We're here with Shri Rajiv Ji Malhotra, author of several books, founder of the Infinity Foundation. We will be dropping links to all of these organizations in the description below. I've certainly enjoyed reading Being Different, and actually previous episodes we've had hosts refer to this book as their favorite book. So there's much deep thought, Rajiv Ji, that I think you've spent many years and energy and effort into reviving our ancient knowledge, the ancestry. I tip my hat to you in the work you've done of identifying this universalism that you speak of, being able to articulate it efficiently, and also the work I think you've done through academia. I feel like I'm still young. I know people would disagree, but throughout our life there are many avenues upon which we can reflect upon what is the truth, what worldview do I have, what are the intrinsic values and systems upon which I think success is, and I know you've mentioned this in many of your talks. So if you're interested in listening to dialogue of this nature, if you're interested in how do we create a society which is more plural, more sustainable, has room for thought and inquiry, then I encourage you to tune in to more episodes of the Vichaar Manthan podcast and look at the papers, book clubs, fireside, sustainable narrative conferences, and all the work that's done at this organization. You'll find all the details online at vichaarmanthan.org. And a final thank you to everyone that's joined us here live in London for this podcast. And thank you again to Shri Rajiv Ji Malhotra for joining us here today.
Thank you very much.